What if your daughter watched you get dragged out of your car for driving through the wrong neighborhood? What if the police told you, "I asked for ID, not your mouth," then smashed your phone and planted drugs in front of your child? This didn't happen in 1965. It happened last summer in Virginia to a federal employee, a mother. Her name was Naomi Reed, and what they didn't know was that she had the clearance, the training, and the calm to expose the entire system from inside out. This story isn't about a traffic stop. It's about a silent war between justice and power. If you've made it this far, tell us in the comments. I've been watching since the beginning. Because stories like this, they're not fiction, they're a mirror. She wasn't speeding. She didn't roll through the stop sign. She didn't even have music playing, but a patrol car had been following her for the past 3 blocks. Quietly, deliberately. Naomi Reed adjusted her rearview mirror. She could see the cruiser's front grille just inches behind her bumper. Her hands stayed at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Next to her, her daughter Emma, 10 years old and wise beyond her years, flipped through a worn copy of The Secret Garden. The windows were down. The air was still. They had just turned into Briar Hill, a neighborhood known for its trimmed hedges, luxury cars, and invisible walls. Mostly white, mostly silent. The kind of place where unfamiliar faces are noticed before unfamiliar cars. Naomi was driving a silver 2012 Honda Accord. As she came to a full stop at the light on East Marshall Street, the cruiser's lights finally flashed. Blue, red. Naomi exhaled and pulled over calmly. The officer didn't approach slowly or politely. He marched up, already annoyed. Older, white, broad-chested. His hand rested on his belt like it was trained to do so. Naomi rolled down her window halfway. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" The officer didn't blink. He leaned in close enough for her to smell his aftershave. "I asked for ID, not for your mouth." Emma looked up sharply, startled. Naomi stayed composed. She reached toward the glove compartment without sudden movement, her voice steady. "My license and registration are right here." But he didn't take them. Instead, he slammed his palm on the hood of the car. "Out! Now!" And just like that, what was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday became a line drawn in history between those who demand obedience and those who remember they were born free. Naomi didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't ask again why she was being pulled over. She simply stepped out, quietly, gracefully, like a woman who had long rehearsed the choreography of survival. Emma stayed inside the car, frozen, clutching her book like it might shield her from what was coming next. The younger officer, Dewey, a rookie, maybe early 20s, hovered near the passenger side, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered gun, eyes darting between Naomi and his partner. You could see it in his face. He wasn't sure this felt right, but he also wasn't sure how to stop it. Naomi stood beside her car, her papers still in hand, her body steady. The officer didn't ask her to turn around. He just grabbed her arm and forced it behind her back. "Is this necessary?" she asked, not pleading, just asking. He didn't respond. The metal of the handcuffs snapped cold against her wrists. Across the street, a man stepped out of the local pharmacy and paused. He held up his phone, uncertain at first, then hit the record button. "I knew she didn't belong here the second I saw her skin color," the older cop muttered, loud enough for Naomi to hear, for Emma to hear, and maybe intentionally for the man with the phone to hear. That's when Emma opened her door and stepped out of the car. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "Stay in the car, baby," Naomi called, her voice calm, commanding. But the little girl didn't move. She stood there on the curb, watching. The younger officer shifted, clearly unsettled now. His eyes flicked toward his partner. "We have a kid out here," he murmured. "I said handle it," the older cop snapped. And then, just like that, Naomi was pushed forward onto the hood. She didn't resist, but she stumbled. Her knees scraped the asphalt. She tried to stay upright, not for herself, but so her daughter wouldn't see her fall. A voice in the crowd shouted, "She didn't do anything." Another whispered, "Are they planting something?" A small, clear plastic bag suddenly appeared in the officer's hand. White powder visible inside. "Found it under the seat," he announced, lifting it up like a trophy. Naomi looked at it. She didn't even blink. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft, but it carried. You're being live streamed right now. The older cop turned to the man with the phone. Turn it off. Without a warrant, this is agency interference. The man didn't lower his phone. And what you just did isn't interference with her life, he said. The older officer's face hardened. He smashed Naomi's phone against the pavement. The screen cracked like ice under a boot. Naomi said nothing, but she turned her head just slightly, enough to see her daughter standing in the sun, wind blowing the pages of her comic book across the street. And in that moment, something changed. Not in Naomi, in everyone else, because what they saw wasn't a threat, wasn't resistance, wasn't a criminal. They saw a mother in handcuffs, on the ground in silence, and they started to question not her, but themselves, and maybe for the first time, the system around her, because it wasn't just about Naomi anymore. It was about every time someone stayed quiet, every time someone believed the badge before the truth, every time justice wore a uniform, but not a conscience. And the only one not saying a word was the woman whose silence was louder than anyone's scream. The walls didn't have to be gray, but they were. The kind of gray that makes you forget what time it is, what day, whether anyone even knows you're here. Naomi sat in the center of the room, wrist cuffed again, this time in front of her, locked to a cold steel bar bolted to the table. A single bulb overhead buzzed faintly. The hum was constant, dull, like an old refrigerator that never quite shuts off. No windows, no clock, just her breath and the echo of it. The younger officer came in first. No words. He simply adjusted the cuffs so she could sit more upright. His hands were gentle, almost apologetic, but he still did his job. That was the tragedy of it. How many people do their jobs even when they know they're wrong? She didn't speak. He left. 72 seconds later, the older one entered. Daryl Hayes, badge number 0143, though Naomi already knew that before she saw it. He didn't sit. He stood behind her, too close. His breath carried a trace of stale coffee and power abused for too long. You want to see your daughter before she turns 18? His voice was smooth now, rehearsed, like he'd said this line 100 times before to women who didn't know the rules. Naomi turned her head slowly, not in fear, not in challenge, just to look him in the eye. I want a lawyer. He laughed, not amused, just amused at the idea of being amused. Sure, you'll get one. After we process the charges, possession, obstruction, maybe even distribution. He dropped a folder on the table with a dramatic thud. You know what this is? He asked, tapping it. Naomi didn't look. Your future, your file, a story we get to write, unless you help us write a softer one. She didn't reply. You cooperate, he continued. You get 6 months, maybe 3, with good behavior. You get to see your girl. Maybe keep your job if no one makes a fuss. He leaned in closer, whispering now. Or you can play stubborn, and I'll make sure this thing goes federal. That little girl of yours, she goes into the system. And we both know what happens to girls who don't have anyone. Naomi blinked. Once, slowly. You done? That stopped him. He smiled again, but it faltered. You think this room is on your side? He asked, knocking once on the table. Cameras down. Audio is malfunctioning. This is your golden hour, and no one's coming for you. She looked up at the corner of the ceiling, then back at him. I'm not waiting for someone to come, she said calmly. I'm waiting for someone to watch. He laughed again, harsher this time. Lady, no one's watching. Naomi leaned forward just slightly. Then why are you sweating? He froze. It wasn't the words, it was the delivery, steady, measured, like a teacher watching a student cheat on a test she had written. He stepped back, collected himself, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing her back in silence. But Naomi knew something he didn't, that every silence in a place like this leaves a residue. Every time someone closes a door thinking no one will hear, it echoes, and someone somewhere always hears it. The girl in the comic book had been right all along. You don't have to shout, you just have to stay standing long enough for the walls to remember your name. And in that gray room, under that flickering light, Naomi Reed became the woman the system wished it had never touched. The door opened softly, not with the slam that came before. This man didn't wear a uniform. No badge, no holster, just a charcoal gray suit, polished shoes, and glasses that glinted every time he moved his head. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. "I've been assigned to assist you," he said flatly, placing a leather briefcase on the table. Naomi didn't respond. She had met men like him before, men who called themselves lawyers but never really answered to justice, only to the system's need for convenience. The man opened the briefcase slowly, deliberately, like every gesture was part of a performance. "This is a standard deal," he said, sliding a file toward her. 3 months, plea to simple possession. No trial, no attention. You walk away clean. Naomi looked down at the folder but didn't touch it. 3 months for something I didn't do? She asked quietly. He sighed as if her resistance was a script he'd also read before. "You're a federal employee, right? You know how this works. The longer you wait, the worse this gets. They escalate, add charges, distribution, resisting, endangerment of a minor." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands like a man giving mercy. "I'm trying to protect you." Naomi tilted her head. "Are you my attorney, or are you their cleanup man?" That broke the calm just a bit. A flicker in his eyes, a small twitch in the corner of his mouth. "I'm here to represent your interests," he said carefully, "within the bounds of the system." Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "What court ordered my detention?" There was a pause, 1 second too long. "This is administrative holding," he finally said. "Pre-indictment, temporary." She leaned forward, her voice still even. "Then you're not here to protect me. You're here to process me." He placed a pen beside the plea deal. "You sign, I'll handle the rest. You will be home before dinner." Naomi didn't move. Instead, she looked up at the ceiling corner. Her lips parted slowly. "How many cameras are in this room?" His eyes followed hers. Reflex, not intention. "Doesn't matter." "It does to me." "The top left one's offline," he replied too quickly. Then seemed to realize he had said too much. Naomi gave the faintest smile. "Offline since when?" He didn't answer. "You said I'd be home by dinner," she whispered. "But I'm not the one this room is recording anymore." His eyes narrowed. "Don't push this." "I'm not pushing, I'm remembering." Then she tapped her finger 3 times on the table. Soft, deliberate, like she was logging something. "You think silence protects you," she continued, "but this room's not silent. You've already spoken too much." The man picked up the file, shoved it back into his briefcase. "I'll return when you're thinking straight," he said sharply. As he stood, Naomi asked, "Do you have children?" He paused, hand on the chair. "A daughter," he replied, low and hesitant. Naomi nodded. "Would you sign away your voice in front of her?" He didn't look back. He left without answering. Moments later, the door reopened. This time, the older officer returned, face tight, movements stiff. "She hasn't signed?" he snapped. The man in the suit shook his head. "She's calculating." "No," the officer muttered, glancing toward the interrogation room's camera lens. "She's mapping the system." Naomi sat quietly, still cuffed to the table, still silent. But outside that room, 2 grown men, one in uniform, one in a 200-year suit, were beginning to sweat, because for the first time, they weren't in control, and they knew it. Naomi didn't win a debate. She didn't raise her voice. She just refused to sign a lie. And in a system built on forced confessions and quiet paperwork, her stillness was a tremor, the kind that makes walls crack, the kind that reminds men who've built careers on silence, that it only takes one person to refuse the script, and suddenly everyone forgets their lines. Naomi had been in many interrogation rooms over the course of her federal career, but always as the one doing the observing, never the one in the chair. Until now. But even here, she wasn't just waiting. She was watching, and the cracks were starting to show. The room had no clocks, but Naomi knew it had been nearly 90 minutes since the so-called lawyer had left. Time in these spaces was a weapon. Stretch it long enough, and most people would sign anything just to get out. But Naomi was built differently. The ceiling fan above her turned just slightly off-center, a soft ticking, not enough to hear unless you were listening. She was listening. The door opened again, this time more cautiously. It wasn't the older cop or the suit. It was the younger officer, the rookie. His hands were empty, no clipboard, no attitude, just that same nervous energy he had at the traffic stop. He stepped in, closed the door behind him, then paused, like he wasn't sure he had permission to be in his own building. "I just wanted to check if you needed water," he said, voice low. Naomi looked up, locking eyes with him. Not angry, not scared, just present. "I'm fine," she said. Then after a pause, "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Miles." "Last name?" "Peterson." She gave a slight nod. "You're not sure what this is, are you?" He looked down, then shook his head. "I saw your daughter's face," he whispered. "That shouldn't have happened." Naomi didn't respond. She didn't comfort him. It wasn't her job. Instead, she asked softly, "Is the evidence tag for the powder logged yet?" His eyes flicked up in alarm. "What?" "You heard me," she said, calm and cold. "There's a log for every evidence item. Chain of custody, tag number, officer ID, timestamp." I don't know." "You should," she said, "because if that bag was entered into evidence without a log, that's a felony." He backed up a step. "And if your name is on any form that says you found it when you didn't, that's obstruction of justice." "I didn't plant anything," he said quickly. "I know," Naomi replied. "That's why I'm telling you now." The silence stretched again. "You don't want to go down with him," she said. He opened the door, voice shaking. "I'll get you that water." But he didn't bring water. He never came back. 10 minutes later, the door opened again. The older officer entered, now with a forced calm that was more dangerous than rage. "You really think you can play games in here?" Naomi didn't blink. "I don't play. I document." He dropped a USB drive onto the table. "Here's your big win. We reviewed the body cam footage. It glitched, corrupted, unusable." Naomi leaned back. "Which camera?" "Yours, the driver's side unit." She shook her head slowly. "Wrong. There are 2 cameras per car, forward dash and interior rear. Even if yours failed, the forward cam captures passenger side exit, and I was pulled from that side." His face froze. She wasn't guessing. She knew. "And I saw your reflection in the glass. You didn't touch the powder until after you circled back." He crossed his arms. "Doesn't matter. Chain of evidence holds." Naomi smiled gently. "No, it doesn't. You failed to log the chain transfer. No timestamp, no field tag, no forensic wrap. You might have skipped that with other people, but I'm not other people." His face flushed. Naomi leaned forward. "I wrote the audit protocol used by your department. Every failure you just made is a violation I once trained federal agents to spot in 30 seconds. He stared at her, but she didn't stop. "I know how to dismantle a system," she said, "because I helped build it." The silence grew heavy, and for the first time, Officer Darrell Hayes realized he hadn't just pulled over a woman. He had pulled over the very woman who knew where every hidden wire was buried in the wall. Outside in the hallway, the surveillance feed flickered once, and somewhere down the corridor, a clerk printing routine forms paused as an alert popped up on his screen. "Evidence tag conflict, SN 42301, unauthorized entry log, red flag issued." Someone in the system had just asked the wrong question at the right time, and the system had answered. Because Naomi didn't need to break it, she only had to wait for it to expose itself. Officer Miles Peterson had never filed an internal report before. Most rookies didn't. You kept your head down, you didn't question the senior officers. You definitely didn't go against the chain of command. But something had shifted in him since he watched that little girl's face, silent, stunned, holding a comic book as her mother was shoved into handcuffs. It wasn't the volume of Naomi Reed's voice that haunted him. It was her silence, steady, disarming, unbreakable. And then she looked him in the eye. "You don't want to go down with him." She had said it with such calm certainty that it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise, like she already knew what the system would do to protect itself and what it would sacrifice to survive, including him. So now here he was, alone in the back office, his screen glowing, cursor blinking, His fingers hovered over the keyboard like he was defusing a bomb. Evidence tag unassigned. Time of entry, unrecorded. Chain of custody, incomplete. Peterson took a shaky breath and typed in the rest, noting that the evidence was not retrieved during initial vehicle inspection, but appeared only after Officer Hayes returned to the vehicle post-detention. He clicked Save. The system asked him, "Do you want to flag this report for internal review?" He stared at the screen, then clicked Yes. A soft chime confirmed the submission. At that moment, he didn't feel brave. He felt like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and didn't know if the parachute would open. Down the hall, Officer Hayes was laughing loudly in the break room, surrounded by 2 sergeants and a desk clerk, probably talking about another mouthy one or playing tough with the badge. Peterson walked past the doorway without looking in. He didn't want to see the face of a man who thought he was still untouchable. Meanwhile, Naomi sat in the holding room. The metal cuffs still marked her wrists, but she wasn't focused on the pain. She was listening again. There was movement outside the door. The pattern had changed. Fewer voices, longer silences, hesitation. Something was shifting. She didn't smile, but she knew the signs. She had studied them her entire career, how institutions fracture, not with sirens or alarms, but with whispers and glances. When the door opened, it wasn't Hayes. It was the precinct captain, older, decorated, polished, the kind of man who had spent decades walking the line between public duty and political survival. He didn't speak right away, just sat down across from her and laid a single document on the table. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice formal, "you're being released. No charges filed." Naomi raised one eyebrow. "No apology?" she asked quietly. The captain looked down. "We are reviewing procedures." That's one way to say it. He slid the release form forward. She signed it. As she stood, she asked without emotion, "Where's my daughter?" The captain hesitated. "She's with Child Protective." Naomi turned sharply. "I want her. Now." He nodded quickly. "She's on her way. We'll escort you outside." As they walked through the corridor, eyes followed her. Some curious, some guilty, but none met her gaze directly. They knew who she was now. They just hadn't known what she was capable of. Outside the precinct, a small crowd had gathered. Not a protest, not yet. But people were watching. Cameras were rolling. A local reporter spoke quietly into her mic. She was detained for over 24 hours with no charges, no warrant, and no attorney present, all without a single official explanation. Naomi stepped outside, the light catching the bruise on her wrist. A few people clapped softly. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, but she stood still, the same way she had stood on the street when the cuffs were slapped on. Then through the crowd, a little voice called out, "Mom!" Emma pushed past 2 officers and ran straight into Naomi's arms. Her daughter clung to her like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Naomi knelt and held her tight. "I'm here," she whispered. "I didn't go anywhere." Emma cried into her shoulder. The cameras kept rolling, and for the first time, the story wasn't about fear. It was about something else. Endurance, truth, and the terrifying strength of someone who refuses to lie, even when silence would be safer. Back inside the precinct, a ping echoed in the internal system. A red flag marked urgent evidence discrepancy landed on the desk of Internal Affairs. The name on the report, Officer Miles Peterson. Attached was a single sentence. "I didn't sign up for this kind of silence." And just like that, the first real crack had formed in the wall. Not from outside pressure, but from inside refusal. By the time Naomi Reed walked through her own front door, she knew the worst wasn't over. But something had shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, she found a letter slid under her door. No envelope. Just 4 words printed on thick, government-grade stock. "You are being watched." She smiled, just a little. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were still trying to scare her, but surveillance only works when the person being watched has something to hide. Naomi didn't. She sat at her kitchen table with a warm cup of coffee, her wrists still marked with the ghosts of steel, and began drafting a report. Not for her superiors, not for the department, for the system itself. She knew its language, its loopholes, its rituals. She wasn't going to protest in the streets. She wasn't going to shout into microphones. She was going to audit them from the inside out. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Captain Reese held an emergency briefing. The report filed by Officer Peterson had been reviewed by Internal Affairs. Quietly, carefully, but its implications were radioactive. There was no way to bury it. Peterson had documented the evidence tampering with exact time logs. The security system confirmed the timestamps. A technician who hadn't realized the significance of what he saw had tried to delete a partial file of the dashcam feed. That deletion attempt had triggered a backup log Naomi herself had helped design 5 years ago as a consultant. They tried to erase it, and the system blinked. Now senior officials weren't asking whether Naomi was innocent. They were asking what else she knew, what else she had access to. Captain Reese stared at the data. A copy of Naomi's old audit report from her time as a federal systems advisor was now in circulation. He saw the signature at the bottom. Cold, precise, familiar. Audit integrity is not measured by absence of errors. It's measured by how many lies survive once truth enters the room. End read. He leaned back in his chair. This wasn't a traffic stop. It was a system alarm. And Naomi Reed was the red blinking light they had all ignored too long. That afternoon, a news clip began circulating. A grainy video of Naomi's arrest, pieced together from 2 separate phones and a nearby pharmacy's security camera. In the footage, the white powder appears in the officer's hand nearly 30 seconds after Naomi is already in cuffs. No one narrates the video. It doesn't need commentary. The silence in the footage said everything. Within hours, the clip went viral. By evening, it had reached 6 million views. Comments flooded in. This is why we don't trust the badge. How many didn't have a camera to save them? She never even raised her voice. And look how they treated her. The police department issued a statement. We are reviewing protocol. No apology, no names. But people were no longer asking for names. They were watching actions. Inside a sterile boardroom at the Department of Public Oversight, Naomi's name was on the screen, a red flag case. Not because of the incident, but because of the aftermath. She wasn't threatening them, she wasn't going to sue, she hadn't spoken at all. And that terrified them, because silence like hers only meant one thing. She was letting the system hang itself. She had no interest in destroying them. She was letting them destroy each other, and it was working. One junior prosecutor recused himself. 2 officers suddenly requested transfers. A data technician resigned without notice. All within 48 hours. Not a single speech, just a woman who knew how to log into the back end of a system designed to forget and press print. That evening, Naomi sat at her desk. She opened her laptop, connected to a secure server she'd built during her time as an internal compliance advisor. She uploaded the partial dashcam backup file she'd recovered, one that clearly showed the evidence bag was not in the car before her removal. She attached her statement, signed with a single line, "For the record, for the daughter who watched." Then she clicked Submit to the Department of Justice, to 3 civil rights organizations, to 1 reporter, and to herself, because she knew the system had just done the one thing it never could afford to do. It blinked. And once a machine blinks, it has to face what's in front of it. Naomi wasn't a protest. She was the mirror. And now they had to look. The courtroom was silent. No gavel, no jury, no witness stand. Just a quiet hearing behind closed doors, deep within the Department of Justice's oversight wing, where names weren't spoken aloud and files disappeared more often than they were filed. Naomi Reed wasn't present. She didn't need to be. Her name wasn't read. No one dared to say it in full, but every person in the room felt her presence, like a shadow that didn't darken, but revealed the dust on everything it touched. On the table lay the evidence, the flagged body cam logs, the unsent email from the precinct captain, the quiet confession of a technician who admitted to deleting footage under pressure. There was no dramatic confrontation, no slamming of fists, just silence. Heavy, exposing. The kind that made people clear their throats not because they had something to say, but because they had nothing left to hide behind. Naomi stood outside the courthouse that day. She didn't go in, didn't wait for a headline. Her daughter Emma sat beside her on a bench, legs swinging gently, reading a new comic book. "I missed you," Emma said. Naomi smiled and placed a hand gently over her daughter's. "I never left," she said softly. "You didn't scream when they grabbed you," Emma whispered. Naomi looked at the sky for a long moment, then replied, "That's because sometimes silence speaks louder than anything else." Emma nodded like she understood, and in some quiet, unshaped way, she did. By week's end, Officer Darrell Hayes was placed on indefinite suspension pending a federal ethics review. Captain Reese announced early retirement. The department issued a restructuring initiative. The phrase meant nothing, but the people now watching, they understood everything. Not because Naomi demanded it, but because she refused to let the system pretend anymore. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just needed to not lower her eyes, and that was enough to make them all look up. The lesson? You don't need a title to hold power. You don't need a microphone to speak truth. And sometimes the most radical act is refusing to be erased. Justice isn't a speech. It's a pattern. It's what you choose to do when no one's clapping. It's standing up. Even when you're sitting in a room with no windows, especially then. If this story moved you, if you saw a piece of truth in Naomi's silence, leave a comment below and let us know. I'm still watching. Because the system isn't just what they do, it's what we allow. And stories like Naomi's aren't just tales of survival. They're reminders that we're never too old to remember. Stillness is not surrender. It's a signal. And maybe, just maybe, it's time the world listened.